Sir, it's 11:30. We are good to go, sir.
Please start.
Okay.
Good morning and warm greetings from the Chennai Center for China Studies. Great to meet you all in another C3S institutional dialogue. Our today's discussion is on the topic China and global food security with Dr. Zhang Hongzhou. There is an old Chinese saying that as long as public grain reserves are full, governance will be easy. As the world's most populous nation, China has the most mouths to feed. In 2020, its population reached 1.4 billion, roughly around a sixth of the world's 7.9 billion people. In the 2021 Global Food Security Index, China ranked 34th out of 113 countries, which measures food affordability, availability, quality and safety, and natural resources and resilience. Even though population growth has dropped to the slowest ever, President Xi Jingping recognizes the need to address the country's food security this year. President Xi Jingping made food security one of the 8 priority areas of cooperation in the Global Development Initiative and remarked that food security is a major issue without which the country could be left vulnerable to foreign factors such as geopolitical risks. Interestingly, on July 8, 2022, attending the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting, Foreign Minister Wang Yi put forward China's cooperation initiative on global food security and expounded on China's stance on food and energy security. On the multilateral front, although China has continuously deepened international cooperation on food supply, however, there are media reports emanating and attributing China's self-sufficiency of food to grain hoarding and China of disrupting the global food market. With this brief introduction, it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker of the day, Dr. Zhang Hongzhou. He is a research fellow with the China program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, NTU, Singapore. He received his PhD in public policy from Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. His main research interests include regional and global resource conflicts and governance, game theory, discourse analysis, and emerging technologies. He is an author cum editor of 3 books, including Securing the Rice Bowl, China and Global Food Security, China and Transboundary Water Politics in Asia, and China's Quest for Resources, Energy, Food and Water with Dr. Wu Fengxi. In addition, he has published in peer-reviewed journals, including the Copenhagen Journal of Asia Studies, Harvard Asia Quarterly, the ISPI Analysis and Southeast Asia Studies, Cambridge Journal of China Studies, among several others. He has also published op-ed articles in major newspapers and magazines in the Asia Pacific, National Interest, South China Morning Post, Interpreter, East Asia Forum, Straits Times, Ale Global Online, Jakarta Post, Fair Observer, and RSIS Commentary, among others. He is frequently interviewed by or featured in news articles of New York Times, BBC, Wall Street Journal, Economist, National Geographic Channel, News Channel Asia, and among several others. With these words, I now request Commodore R.S. Vasan, Director General C3S, to kindly deliver the opening address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Bala. First of all, a very hearty welcome to Chennai Center for China Studies, Dr. John. Great pleasure having you with us. With the kind of credentials that you have, I'm sure we will have a very rich discussion today on China's food security challenges. In addition to what Bala has given in terms of the very definition of food security, as also the standing of China, which was 34th amongst 113 countries. There are other important factors which I'm sure we'll bring to the table, but just to draw the attention of the participants, I would like to say that in the last, the Global Food Security Index chart that was prepared, this was last year. Unfortunately, amongst all the Asian countries, the only country that figured in that chart was Japan, not India, not China. So, obviously, it tells us that, though we claim that we are self-sufficient, we have a long way to go. The only countries which are in the GFSI, of these 12 countries which are there, are mostly Western countries, including UK, the European countries, and others. And the number in the Asia where we claim that, we withdraw perhaps as an agrarian nation, is put to rest. So, this is where we have to set the stage in terms of analyzing how Asian countries, and more specifically China, would meet its demands in the coming decades. What's also come out is that China, which was self-sufficient, at one stage, I think a year or 2 years ago, it had an index of 101 plus, and it is dropping. this index is dropping to something like 76.8, which shows that there are serious challenges. There are also acquisitions, particularly after the pandemic and also of the Ukraine war, that China is holding. This is some criticism that China says, I'm not holding, but the facts and figures tell you that something like 680 metric million tons have been hoarded. And this is obviously to cater for emergencies and contingencies which are there post-Ukraine war. Another important point we in India note is that the BRI initiative or the Maritime Self-Reliance Initiative is also on those countries where it is able to buy some agrarian land. It specifically happened in the case of Pakistan, where they also bought hectares of agrarian land, and they have agreements with the local governments for ensuring that certain amount of products are cultivated jointly, which will also secure the needs of China in the coming centuries. Something like 150 million, I know I've again looking at statistics, I was closely looking at some other statistics, 145, 146 million Chinese people are likely to be malnourished. This is one of the analysis that's been done by experts who feel that it is one weakness of China, which I'm sure you would like to address, because with 22% of the global population and with something like 67% of agrarian land, it has a huge challenge. Being the largest, most populous country, it has to start importing. So that explains why post-COVID and post-Ukraine, it's holding grains, it's holding rice, it's holding every commodity that is of use to it. Apparently, all the cities have a contingency plan, Beijing, Shanghai, etc., where 15 days of emergency stock is supposed to have been kept aside for people to access should there be such calamity in the future. Likewise, there are many other, like our own India, which has the Food Corporation Limited. We're also keeping stocks for our people to cater for these emergencies. But India, was accused at one stage of hoarding, post-Ukraine, which is not the case, because if you look at the statistics of India and China, we find that ours is according to what the Charter of Food Corporation of India Limited is concerned. So I do not want to discuss too much because we have an expert here. It was only to set the stage and try and identify at least few of the challenges on which Dr. John can look at and evaluate and tell us what the future holds for Asian countries, or more specifically China, and how are there any interoperable mechanisms that will provide greater sense of security as far as food is concerned. We're specifically looking at food security. Remember also the recent events with Australia and others also has upset the equations that were there, which led them to import beef, pork from some of these European countries and Australia. And that's another point, because the consumption is going up. The cities in China are consuming more meat, more fish, and and if you're not producing it, obviously you have to look around. This also explains at a strategic level why they are using the maritime militia to protect their fisheries fleet, both in the East China Sea and South China Sea. But that's a different kettle of fish. So let's talk about only fish today. And over to you, Dr. John. All the best.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Commander Wesley, for the very nice introduction, and of course for the excellent background information regarding food security and other aspects, which I really hope you can continue your talk so that I can learn more from you. And then, of course, thanks, Bala, and then the China Center for China Study for the kind invitation. Really a pleasure and honor to be here. And before I start, my sincere apologies for the delay and rescheduling due to COVID-19, which has severely affected the daily work, and then my entire family was infected a few weeks ago. But luckily, the syndrome was not severe. So with that, thank you very much again, everyone, for your time. And then let me begin with my presentation. Please allow me to share my PPT slides. Okay. All right. So the topic of my today's presentation is about China's food security strategy reform and its global agriculture policy. So in this presentation, I will talk mainly about 3 points. The first one is the food security strategy reform. I think Bala just now has mentioned, and also Commander has also mentioned how China has taken food security as a very important political task, and then it's actually has been highlighted by the Chinese leaders for generations. Food security is one of the most important, the paramount political task for the Chinese government. I will talk about how the food security strategy has evolved, especially since Xi Jinping's leadership, and then I will focus on this emergence of China's global food security, global agriculture policy, or the global aspects of China's food security strategy, overseas investment, merger and acquisition, trade diversification, etc. And then if I have time, I'll touch on briefly about the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war on China's food security. So let me begin by giving you a brief background idea about the definition of food security. So we have to be clear when we talk about food security in different culture, in different country, it means different things, especially in the Chinese context, because the English term food security is not really a term that is often or frequently used in China. While the issues that are normally covered by the English term food security in China is called grain security or liangshanquan. This terminology difference clearly captures the fact that for decades of thousands of years, actually China considers food self-sufficiency a function of the production of grains, where grains are basically broadly defined to include cereals like rice, wheat, and corn, and also grains and beans, soybeans, and potatoes. So if you compare this definition with other with the definition of food security and food safety, it's like this. It's a much narrower term. It focuses primarily on the supply side, on the grain supply, but of course it overlaps a little bit with the safety aspect. So in terms of given this with this kind of definition in mind, in the Chinese context, owing to the painful history of periodic famine and the distrust of the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party towards the international market since 1949, especially during the Cold War. It has followed a food security strategy that working towards self-sufficiency in grain. So it has the entire food self-sufficiency policy was, you can trace officially you can trace back to the 1996 white paper, grain issue in China. It was the white paper is the first ever white paper issued by China. The background of the white paper is that in 1994, you had a very famous American scholar called Lester Brown, who wrote an article that later became a book. The title of the article in the book is "Who Will Feed China?" The basic argument is that we are facing enormous food shortages in the future, and then China's food shortage will bring disastrous consequences for the world. And then this has triggered huge international concerns and domestic discussions in China. And then the Chinese government, in responding to the international concerns about its international and domestic concerns about its ability to feed itself, it issued this food security white paper. And in this white paper, it formally commits itself to the 95% self-sufficiency rate in terms of grain supply and 100% self-sufficiency rate in cereal supply. And then with this self-sufficiency, high degree of self-sufficiency as a bottom line, the country has invested enormous amount of financial, of course, and agricultural resources in terms of land allocation, in terms of water allocation to boost domestic grain production. But then in 2007, 2008, during the global food crisis, I think Bala also just mentioned, when there was a global food crisis, which was triggered by a variety of factors, including speculations, and then you have several high-profile Western leaders, including the then Prime Minister of UK, was accusing and China and also India for the rising demand for those developing countries for causing the global food crisis. So again, facing the international criticism, China introduced this mid to long-term food security plan. And then in this plan, again, the 95% self-sufficiency rate for grain, 100% self-sufficiency rate for cereal was highlighted, and it has been laid down as the mandatory target for the development of agriculture and food, and for the food security. And it aimed to achieve 600 million tons of grain by 2020. Sorry, is about 540 tons rather than. But very quickly, if you look at the actual production, the target 540 tons was actually reached in 2010. That was long before the deadline of 2020. But the problem is that despite the fact that the Chinese, especially in terms of grain production, since 2003 and then until from 2003 onward has been increasing significantly. But the problem is that the total grain import has been increasing even more rapidly. If you look at the imports and the total share of grain production, even in 2010, it already represents about over nearly 12%, and then by 2020, it was already about 21%, which means the 95% self-sufficiency rate laid down by the Chinese government became infeasible, despite the fact that the domestic grain production has far reached or exceeded the official target. And then not only the grain self-sufficiency rate is declined due to rising import, there are other problems associated with China's long-standing self-sufficiency policy. The first one is the sustainability problem. With very limited water and agricultural resources, China basically adopted very intensive way of farming. And also with rising production costs in the southern part of China, which has abundant water. But the economic cost was very high because a large amount of land has been converted for commercial development, for housing. And then the entire agricultural production center in China has been shifting north. But the problem is that in northern part of China, you have very limited water resource to begin with. So the water scarcity became a huge problem, and also because the intensive use of fertilizer and pesticides has led to severe water pollution, in addition to farmland degradation due to extensive farming. And the other key factor of this sustainability issue is the rising cost. As more and more farmers migrate from rural area to cities, the labor cost has been rising, and also because of huge demand for land conversion, the land cost is also rising very rapidly. As a result, the production cost for grain in China is much higher than the international than the major exporters such as the United States, Australia, and Canada. And these have led to a huge price gap between the domestic grain and the international grain. As a result, sometimes I think in 2012, 2013, for a few years, the domestic agricultural grain price was about twice or even 50 to 2 times of the global price, which has led this price gap has led to huge amount of rice and wheat and corn smuggling across the borders. And then, apart from the sustainability issues, China increasingly faces the structural imbalance. The first source of imbalance is the grain versus non-grain. As Chinese consumers became wealthier, they consume less and less wheat and less rice, but more animal proteins. You have more pigs, beef, mutton, milk. But the problem is that when the Chinese government allocate or concentrate the agricultural resources for grain production, the production of these non-grain products, especially as meat products, has been affected. And then even in terms of grain, you have this imbalance between staples and feed grains. This is partly due to the rising demand for meat products, as more Chinese consumers are consuming meat, beef, mutton, and then the demand for feed grains like soybeans, corn has been rising rapidly. So what happens right now is that with the declining demand for rice and wheat, the staples supply is basically self-sufficiency is being maintained. If you look at the entire total quantity, but the problem is that for corn, there's increasingly gap, and of course for soybeans, China already became by far the largest soybean importer. And then the last sort of imbalance is structural imbalance, because for decades, Chinese government has focused on to achieve this goal of grain self-sufficiency, which is basically measured in terms of quantity. They basically overlooks the issue of quality. But even for rice and wheat, as Chinese consumers are demanding more and fine grains, especially let's take wheat for example. When they consume more and more bread, they demand high quality wheat which cannot be made through domestic production. As a result, if you that explains why when you look at the total number of, let's say, in terms of China's grain production or wheat production, it seems to be balanced. Or sometimes China says that it has surplus in terms of wheat and rice, but it's still importing millions of tons of rice and wheat is because this quality, because of this structural imbalance in terms of quality. They have access in terms of low quality rice and wheat, but insufficient production or supply of high quality rice and wheat. As a result, they have to import million tons of wheat and rice from the international market. And then the third catalyst for reform is the conflict interest among key actors. This long-standing self-sufficiency policy is very costly, and the Chinese government provides massive amount of financial support to the farmers, and also massive amount of financial support for the procurement storage, which has of course become a heavy financial burden for the country. As a result, you rarely see the Chinese central minister questioning the logic of this long-standing self-sufficiency policy. In 2015, the then finance minister Lou Jiwei openly questioned the feasibility and the logic of China's self-sufficiency policy, and also there are also concerns and voice oppositions from other ministries like Ministry of Environment Protection. Apart from that, the farmers are not happy with it as well. Despite the fact that Chinese government has been providing huge amount of financial support, direct grant subsidies to the farmers for them to encourage them to produce grains, and also in terms of subsidy to fertilizer, subsidies to agricultural machinery. But because the production cost is rising more rapidly, then the pure profit in terms of grain production is very low, and for several years is actually negative. This is even after the grain subsidies by the Chinese government. And then if you compare the profitability of grain farming with other, let's say, cash crops, is even lower. And of course, not to mention the potential for economic returns for converting farmland for housing or commercial development. And the farmers will get far more compensations if they had the opportunity to let their land to be acquired by the local governments, and then for commercial and industrial development. And then this conflict interest between central and local governments. The central government, of course, which are very much concerned about the idea, the issue of food security, want the country to produce more grains. But the problem is that for local governments, grain production produce very little economic returns. And to make matter worse, because if you want to produce more grains, it basically means you have less room or policy space in terms of allocating or converting farmland for commercial development, for housing, for industrial development, which limits the economic perspective or economic growth potentials for the particular region or particular province. And also because in terms of agricultural subsidies or financial support for farmers, part of these financial burdens also falls on the shoulders of the local governments. In other words, local governments, instead of collecting any financial tax revenues from the agriculture sector, has to provide financial support to the farmers. As a result, they have very little incentive in producing or in encouraging the farmers to producing grain. So with this, and also the rising imports for even including rice and wheat and corn, and I realized that self-sufficiency is no longer feasible. So in 2013, the Chinese government has launched a major reform of its food security strategy. And then the new food security strategy has been defined and introduced, which include basically 4 components. The one is, of course, is still domestic grain production. The other one is emphasizing the food production capacity. It's about ensuring long-term sustainability of country's agriculture sector. And then the third one, and the very important one, is that for the first time, the Chinese government recognized and included international import as part of its food security strategy. It calls for better utilization of international resources to meet the country's rising demand. And the last one is about technology support. It's about investing more in all sorts of agriculture technology through better seeds, through better agricultural machinery, and of course better irrigation technologies. And then with this new round of reform, the grain security concept, just now we mentioned about how grain security in China, or food security in China, is different from the popular international concept of food security. But after this round of reform, the grain security concept became more and more aligned with the international definition of food security. And then if you want to summarize it, then is as simple. It can be simply considered that a dual food security strategy took shape after this reform. So it's basically, on the one hand, it's about enhancing domestic food production capacity, and on the other hand, it's about better utilizing international resources. And then this figure shows how the grain security concept has enlarged. And then if you look at the red circle here, is more and more aligned with the international definition of food security. This has major implications for China's agricultural development and the food security of the world. Okay, so this figure shows the key elements, 2 key parts of the country's new food security strategy. On the one hand, is about ensuring achieving agriculture modernization, farmland protection, consolidation of resource, farmland restoration, upgrading, and technology improvement, such as GMOs, genetically modified crop tech. And then the other one is the global agriculture policy, which I will talk more today. And then the second part is about global agriculture policy. The objective of China's global agriculture policy is 5-fold. And then the first and foremost is about bringing advanced technologies and foreign capitals to modernize the country's agriculture sector. This has really been discussed or been mentioned in the international medias or academic discussions when we come to China's agriculture going out or China's global agriculture policy. But in fact, one of the key objectives of the country in terms of agriculture going out or in terms of global agriculture policy is still about bringing advanced technologies, foreign capitals, so that to accelerate agriculture modernization in China. I will talk more later on. And then the second is about expanding agriculture export. But China still has, despite the fact it's importing more and more agriculture products, particularly in terms of land-intensive products like soybeans, corns, and rice and wheat from international market, it's still a major exporter, and it has competitive advantage in producing labor-intensive products like fruits, vegetables, especially to the East Asian neighbors, and of course processed agricultural products. So it wants more opportunities, so that more income earnings for its farmers for economic development. And then the third aspect is about supplementing the domestic food production and gaining control is over its overseas food supply chain. This is about import diversification, boosting or building China's own global agro-business from global agro-business traders. And then the first one is about expanding global food production. It's about investing, exporting, and it's about investing or assisting other countries, like especially developing countries through South corporations, using Chinese technology, Chinese capitals, so that they can produce more. The rationale is that for those developing countries, if they can produce more, they will be importing less for international market, so that China, as the biggest importer, will have less competitions when it comes to agriculture import, and of course less criticism on China if the price increases. And then the fifth one is about ensuring or contributing to a stable and favorable global food system. As the biggest agriculture importer, is China now, of course, a stable and fair, open global food trading system works to its advantage. And then in terms of key elements, is again it has five. The first one is agriculture import diversification. The second one is about expansion of overseas agriculture investment. The next one is about new model of agriculture cooperation, South agriculture cooperation in particular. And then the fourth one is about a stable agriculture relationship with the strategic trading partners. And the fifth one, a very important one, is about increasing the country's or improving the country's pricing power. This is done through a variety of means, including building up China's own state-owned agro-business, which is related to the entities. This is about the main entities that implements China's global agriculture policy is the state-owned agro-business as a leading force. Of course, you also have private actors and enterprises, or these so-called dragon head enterprises. And in terms of geographical focuses, the priority is the Belt and Road countries, especially after the launch of BRI in 2003. And then South America is, of course, is very important for various reasons: soybeans, corns, and beef. Other countries and global vision. I think we covered it already. Let me see. Okay. Yes. I think in terms of the key elements, one thing that has received very little or relatively little attention is the commodity trading center. This is a very important approach for China to enhance its global food pricing power. For many years, after China has become the biggest importer of soybeans, China basically has no say in terms of the soybean price, because the soybean price is instead in North America, especially in the United States, controlled by a few, heavily influenced by a few Western agro-business traders like Cargill, Louis Dafoe, and Bunge, the so-called ABCD company, and also heavily influenced through the Chicago Commodity Center. So China wants to build up the commodity center of itself, and has been investing heavily in developing Dalian and Shenzhen as the commodity trading center that is hoping that in the future it has more influence over the global agriculture trading, especially in terms of basic commodities like soybeans, corns, and wheat. Okay, in terms of our investment, if you look at the numbers, of course, it's still quite small as compared to it's still quite small. Only accounts a small proportions of China's outward direct investment, but it has been growing at a very rapid rate. And if you compare the numbers, right, in 2018, accumulated overseas agriculture direct investment had reached $19 billion. It's about 22 times higher than that of 2003. And then currently you have over 1,000 or 1,300 Chinese firms investing over 100 countries, and which covers all stages of agriculture production. It's not just about Chinese companies go overseas to lease or buy piece of land to produce grains, produce other agricultural products, and then ship back to China. It's actually focusing more and more on the middle range and even the upper range of the entire supply chain. It's building agriculture infrastructures, purchasing or buying or building, there's a grain depot, grain storage facilities, railways that has specific purpose for transporting grains and agricultural products. And then, but if you compare direct agriculture investment with agriculture and food related to modern acquisitions, the volume is much higher. China is a much preferred and faster way for China to expand its agricultural presence overseas. The number is a bit outdated, but even a few years ago, the number suggests that China's agriculture and food related to merger acquisitions exceeded $60 billion. And this includes very high profile takeovers by the Chinese companies in various sectors, like the WH Group's $4.7 billion dollar takeover of American company Smithfield, which is still the biggest investment by the Chinese companies in the United States. And then COFCO's investment, acquisition of Dutch grain trader and Singapore-based Noble Group. And then most important, high profile, and the biggest one is the ChemChina's $43 or $44 billion takeover of Syngenta. This is about agricultural crop protection, fertilizers, pesticides, and more importantly, is about genetically modified crop technology. And then very recently, if you follow the news, you will see China has regrouped, and then is about to allow Syngenta, the regrouped organized Syngenta, to go IPO after recent years of strong central government support towards allowing commercialization of GM crops in China. And then the other key elements is about international cooperation, as I mentioned earlier. One of the key aspect is about South cooperation through FAOs, providing financial and technical assistance to developing countries. I will not bore you with the details, but suffice to say that a lot is going on. A lot has been going on. The Chinese government is investing more and more through the South cooperation mechanism. And then let's talk little bit about the key entities. I think this is, again, a very important, at least from my perspective, very important part of China's global agriculture policy. Is about building China's global agribusiness champions, so that it can compete with the so-called ABCD groups, and to help China to gain the so-called pricing power. Xi Jingping has made explicit remarks about putting more resource and financial support, so that those Chinese companies could have the control of China over China's overseas grand supply of food supply, and then in a way to safeguard the country's food security. There are 3 tiers of China's global agribusiness champions. The first one is the central SOE, is the COFCO, is the first and foremost the most important one, and Camp China we talk about it later on. And then the tier 2 is the state farms. You have the Beidahong Group, Guangdong Farms, Bright Food, for which located in different Chinese provinces, has different focus. And then the third tier is the private companies. Just now we mentioned about WH Group, which has spent about $4.7 billion purchasing or taking over America's biggest, world's biggest pork producer, Smithfield. And then I'll give you an example about how rapidly COFCO has risen from a Chinese SOEs to one of the biggest agricultural grain trader in the world. If you look at the number in 2010, and is already by the second largest in terms of asset. And then this year, it has, over the last 2 years, it has increased. The ranking has increased even further, especially in terms of Fortune 500 rankings. How did COFCO has become? How it has become grow so rapidly? I think it's mainly through domestic and international merger and acquisition. So one of the key approach taken by the Chinese government to have its own agriculture champion is to combine all these many of these so-called agriculture SOEs and merge them together. So they have launched a series of high-profile merger acquisitions even among the central SOEs, so that COFCO becomes bigger and bigger in very short period of time. After it became bigger domestically, and then began to invest or went on a buying spree internationally. So you have the COFCO company has spent billions of dollars buying all sorts of existing agro-businesses in different countries. And then in terms of geographical focus, I mentioned a little bit about it earlier. It's very clear by now is the BRI countries. It's not just in terms of the reports by the Chinese medias, but if you look at the government policies, right, especially in terms of #1 documents and the leader's speech, it's very clear that over years they began to prioritize BRI, and the signal and trend is very, very clear. This, especially over the past few years, with the rising tensions between China and the Western countries, the United States, Australia, Canada, which has for years been the biggest supplier of agricultural products to China, and then China is becoming increasingly concerned over its international food supply. So it wants to diversify, and the way the countries that it want to diversify to are the BRI countries. So we argue, at least in one of the paper we wrote, that under BRI and with reform of the Chinese food security strategy, China is building a so-called full Silk Road, in which the countries attempt to restructure the global food supply chains through overseas agriculture investment, agriculture technology transfer, massive investment in infrastructure, and accelerated policy coordinations. And lastly, let me just cover a little bit about the impacts of Russia-Ukraine war on China's food security strategy. Of course, it has presented many challenges, China, not just domestic, not just in terms of diplomatic challenges, but in many aspects of Chinese economy, including food security. The main aspect includes is disastrous consequence on a neoliberal food regime, which China now heavily depends on. And also, more specifically, is that it has specific major impacts on the country's import of corns, soybean, fertilizer, and wheat. Let's take corn, for instance. Before 2012, China imports most of its corns from the United States. As China's corn import grows, it has concerns that over-reliance on US may jeopardize the country's food security strategy. So it began to diversify. The country where it turned to is Ukraine. So within a very short period of time, Ukraine has replaced the United States as the biggest supplier of corn to China. This has been lasting for many years, but of course, since the 2010 annual trade war deals, China began to import more US corns as part of the commitment. But still, Ukraine, even if you look at 2021, it still represents about 1/3 of China's corn supply. Rather, given the worsening perspective of the China-US relations, is in China's interest to maintain a stable, let's say, corn supply or trading relationship with Ukraine. But with the war, and then no one knows how long it can last, and of course the blockade, it has major impacts, to be sure, in terms of on China's diversification effort in terms of corn supplies. Wheat is a different story. In terms of wheat, as I mentioned in the very beginning, China's, if you look at total quantities, is largely self-sufficient, but still, last year import about 10 million tons of wheat due to decrease in domestic production. Also, a key aspect of this import is the quality structure imbalance in terms of quality. So China has imported high quality wheat, million tons of high quality wheat from international market, mainly from Australia, Canada, European countries, and America. So again, they want to diversify. The countries that China is turning to has been turning to includes Russia, Middle East, Central Asian countries, and then some of the Central and Eastern European countries. In fact, right before the war between Russia and Ukraine started, when during Putin's visit to China, two countries signed a major deal in terms of allowing major agricultural deals. And under this deal, China will open up its entire its wheat market to the entire Russian wheat, which is a major deal, a major step taken by China to diversify its agricultural supply. But then, when after the war, and then there was concerns or international criticisms about all sorts of agriculture, all sorts of economic engagement between China and US, between China and Russia. It's like right now purchasing oil and gas, right? It became sort of extending support to Russia. It's same thing happened to India when India buys oil and gas from Russia. They face a lot of international pressures or pressures from Western countries. And the same thing applies here in terms of wheat. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. You have 3 more minutes, sir.
Okay, I think this is the last slide. Finishing up. Okay. I think the same story happens with fertilizer, especially in terms of potash supplier. Potash fertilizer. China has imports half of its potash fertilizers from the international market, mainly which has been led by Russia, of course, Canada, and Belarus. But with these Western sanctions, it became increasingly difficult, of course, disruptions to the global fertilizer supplies. So major uncertainties, major disruptions to the entire food supply chain, which, of course, affects China's global agriculture policy. But then to conclude, with the recent events like the China-US trade war, ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and Russia-Ukraine war, has shifted some of the policy focus in China towards, again, to the idea of self-sufficiency. But it's safe to say, but I think it is certain that there's no turning back for China. China's global quest for food security or global agriculture policy will continue, as it will rely more and more on international market for food. As China expands its agriculture presence overseas from all sorts of means like investment, technical assistance, trade facilitation, and massive BRI infrastructures, the global food supply chain is being reshaped. And this creates both opportunities and challenges for countries around the world. And how this challenge, and how the impact will be felt, I think it will differ by country and differ by sector. Okay, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful presentation. I request Ms. Sapna to moderate the Q&A session by taking questions from the chat box. Over to you, Sapna.
Thank you, sir. Audience, kindly post your questions in the chat box. I'll be reading out one question. Okay. First question is from Mr. Balasubramanian. In 2013, China got on lease a farmland of 3 million hectares area in Ukraine. How has war affected supplies from it?
Okay, I think this was, I remember there was a lot of discussions and international tensions on this so-called 3 million hectare land deal purchase or takeover by a Chinese company. But I think it turned out to be it's just a rumor. The deal has never been. I don't think it even been officially discussed. So there was no. This deal does not exist, I would say. But having said that, despite of course the fact that this kind of deal has never taken place, China did has major investment, has invested billions of dollars in Ukraine. Rather than leasing or purchasing land, is mainly through building up agriculture infrastructures, direct merger and acquisition, purchasing or taking over on agriculture traders or agro business in Ukraine. COFCO has major presence in Ukraine's food sector. So that's why during when the war broke out, and then there was reports saying how much economic cost Chinese state-owned enterprises COFCO has suffered, right? There was even rumors suggesting one of the $1 billion investment agriculture grand depot by COFCO was hit by missile or by rocket launch.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Commodore. On water scarcity, is it both for drinking and for agriculture? There are complaints of more than 80% of groundwater and some 50% of river water.
There's some issue with your audio.
No issues.
You can ask
Not being suitable.
I can take over,
Yes.
sir.
What measures are being?
I can't hear Sapna. Please let Bala take over.
Dr. Zhang, I'll be taking the questions from the chat box.
Yes, sir.
Commodore Vasan has asked,
Okay.
on water scarcity, it is both for drinking and for agriculture. There are complaints of more than 80% of groundwater and some 50% of river water not being suitable. What measures are being implemented by the government?
Okay, this is a very good question. I think one of the most pressing challenge to China's agricultural production of food security is water issue. So as I mentioned very briefly during the presentation, so for traditionally Chinese, if you look at China's water distribution, right, China, of course, as a country as a whole, it has abundant water, but of course, as per capita terms, has very limited water. But to make sense even worse is that much of the water is concentrated in the southern part of China, the Yangtze River basin. So this part of China used to be the major agricultural producing centers in places like Guangdong, Suzhou, Zhejiang that produce a lot of rice. But because these countries open up, those provinces open up first, and then they became much economically advanced. Large arable quantity of arable land has been converted for commercial development of housing, so it became so densely populated. Right? You have major migrations from inland to Chinese inland provinces to these coastal areas. As a result, agricultural production in the waters abundant southern provinces began to decline. But because the Chinese government maintained this self-sufficiency policy, so more and more grain production has to come from somewhere. So naturally, because the economic comparative advantage and also policy shift, more and more grains are now being produced in northern part of China, in northeast China in particular, and also in the central China plain, which has very limited water to begin with. As a result, in places like in the central China plain, like Hebei, Henan, Tianjin, etc., agricultural production heavily rely on groundwater irrigation. As a result, the water table has been declining rapidly, and then also due to massive use of fertilizer and pesticides, it led to heavy water pollution. Of course, other sources of pollution as well, industrial development, human waste. So as a result, I think you are, as rightly pointed out, there was official and also scholar reports suggesting much of the groundwater became unsuitable for human consumption, unsuitable even for agricultural production. So with this, the Chinese government has taken several major steps. The first one is about diverting waters from south to north, right? I think you has heard about this mega water transfer projects, right? Diverting waters from Yangtze River. You have three routes, and central, eastern, and then western route, diverting massive amount of water from the southern part of China to northern part of China to meet the rising water demand and also to replenish the groundwater supply in the underground water. And then the other, this is for one. The other one is about, of course, reducing fertilizer and control in terms of fertilizer consumption. So in 2015, China had launched this so-called zero growth policy for fertilizer consumption. It realized that fertilizer and pesticide consumption is a major source of pollution, water pollution in particular. So it decided to restrain and control the use of fertilizer in agriculture, fertilizer and pesticide. And then the other source, the other wise there, of course, is about introducing various policies to improve irrigation efficiency. They are also talking about for years about agriculture irrigation pricing reform, or agricultural water usage pricing reform, and it has been implemented in some areas.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have a question, sir.
Okay.
Historically, China was not known for dairy food consumption.
Mhm.
Today, it has two of the world's largest dairy farms, one at Mudanjiang with 1 lakh cows and the other about half the number. What explains the change in desire for dairy food?
You mean milk?
Yes.
Okay. I think this is partly of the westernization of the culture of the diet. Milk consumption became very common after, I think, decades of promotion for a variety of reasons. And then this is for one. I think it's closely following the footsteps of Japan, right? I think they realized that the traditional, I don't know whether it's it's partly of the so-called influence by is about learning from the West. And the other is the official promotions. I think every year Chinese government issues these guidelines for Chinese. I think it's nutrition or food safety. Right? It's about promoting, encouraging more consumption of milk, eggs, animal proteins, diversification. So yeah, given you again, and also the massive, very rapid rate of urbanization, right? More and more Chinese farmers, they migrate, rural residents migrate from rural area to cities, especially in coastal areas. They change their food consumption habit. So the demand for dairy and then beef has been rising rapidly.
Today, there's an increased demand in China for seafood. The supplies are already declining due to climate change. How does China intend to tackle this?
Sorry, what food?
Increased demand in China for seafood.
Oh, seafood. Oh, yeah.
The supplies are already declining due to climate change. How does China intend to tackle this?
Oh yeah. See, one of my research areas about China's so-called fishery policy. China is by far the biggest producer of seafood or fishery product and aquaculture products. It's about 1/3 of global total. And then traditionally is mainly, I mean, in about 1980s, right? Much of the seafood came from wild catch, right? The direct catch from seas and then fresh waters. But then gradually, China has been developing agriculture, fish farming. So right now, if you look at the entire seafood structure, I think nearly 80%, 75 or 79% of China's seafood came from farm fish, fish farming. And also on the other hand, China has been controlling, trying to reduce the intensity in terms of freshwater fishing and also marine fishing. But the problem, as you mentioned, is that on the one hand, you want to control the total fish production, especially in terms of wild catch. On the other hand, the demand is rising, so it is imbalance here. What China has been doing to meet this, to address this imbalance, of course, one way is like what has been doing for the entire for grains, for other crops, for other food products, is by importing more. So of course, right now, China is still the net exporter of fishery products in terms of value. But if you compare it, if you look at the quantity of fishery products, China now is the net importer of fishery products. I think by 3 or 4 million tons of fishery products, and then this gap will be even bigger in the future. This is for one. The other one is that, of course, more emphasis on fish farming. And in recent years, the bigger policy focus is about developing offshore, or so-called marine ranching. They want to, because for many years, the agriculture and aquaculture sector in China concentrate in the coastal area and then inland areas, right, which has created a lot of problems, sustainability problem, pollution, etc. And then heavy use of this artificial hormones, etc., has led to food safety concerns. So now they want to develop more eco-friendly offshore fish farming, far away from the seas, reliance on high technologies. And very recently, Chinese government has been introduced various policies to focus more on technology breakthrough in terms of better seeding. Seafood, it has been identified as one of the key areas. They want to develop better varieties, better types of farm fish.
Next question is by Commodore Vasan. He has asked, with again complaints from downstream countries of Mekong, China is accused of denying the water share to the lower riparian countries. So how do you see the unfolding of the water wars in the region? India also complains of the potential of the Three Gorges Dam to disrupt the areas downstream when required. Your thoughts on this?
Okay, first one, I don't know, the Three Gorges Dam is the one that affects, that affects a lot. I mean, it's an internal dam, right? I mean, it will not have major impact for other countries. But I don't know whether you're referring to the potential discussions of dams on the upstream of the Brahmaputra River or Yangtze River. Yes, I think in recent years, at least, there has been some discussions about building dams, at least on upstream. So China has been building that as well. 2 or 3 dams has been completed. And then I think earlier this year, the 14th Fire Plan, it included some mentioning about major development in the hydropowers along the main streams of Brahmaputra. I think it has created a lot of concerns and in the downstream countries. How much it will affect the downstream countries? For one, it depends on the types of dam, what kinds of dam it will be built. And then, of course, right now, this is for one. The other is, I think, even as of now, it remains an open question whether this kind of dams or even water diversion project will ever be built. Because there has been a lot of internal oppositions as well. It's like the Three Gorges Dam. It is one of the most controversial hydro projects in China. And then also like the South-North Water Diversion Project. So far, as of now, there has been no major celebration because there's major concerns, criticism from various Chinese society or from different segments of Chinese society over the potential negative impacts of these water diversion projects, the major dams. So it remains to see whether or how far they will go. I think for the Mekong River is a very, it has in recent years become a very hot topic. Of course, building dam will inevitably have major consequences or impacts on downstream countries. I think there has been there have been reports from different sources and different entities. Some suggesting the impact has been severe, some suggesting that the dam of Chinese dams is about regulating the water flows, more waters during the dry season, and then less water during the monsoon season to reduce the flood impact. So far, I think even the Mekong River Commissions, their report or their scientific findings points to very confusing and sometimes inconclusive findings. So I really don't know where the scientists or where the science really point us to. But I think and the other thing is also because law is also building a lot of dams, right? So as law build more dams, the impacts on the downstream country will mainly comes through the last dam that have been built. I think that's growingly will become a major concerns for countries further downstream like Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand. I think things are also much more complicated because the dams law built receive investment from Thailand and even Vietnam, and then also the electricity law is not. We will not be using so much electricity. Rather, it is exporting its electricity to other countries, including Thailand and Vietnam, and also very recently, Singapore has signed a deal to purchase electricity from Laos. So it's a much complicated picture, I would say.
So the next question I have is, how far has China come in production of cultured meat? Has public acceptability been tested?
This is a very good question. I think in recent years, at least in the past few months, I saw some Chinese leaders explicitly, especially including Xi Jingping, they explicitly mentioned about this cultured meat or artificial proteins. I think this is the first time it is suggesting more central government policies or focus in these areas from the various top of the government. I think on the demand side of consumers, I would say for many, if you think about it, if you look at Chinese traditional cuisines, right, they have been eating this so-called alternative meat, artificial meat for centuries, like tofu. It's a very typical example. People are loving it. I don't think there will be major so-called resistance or concerns from the Chinese consumers towards this cultivated meat. I guess the main factor will be about price and taste. And as of now, I think some of the products developed by these companies, Beyond Meat or the other, the price is too high. I think it's not ready for mass consumption. I think it's still higher than the so-called traditional meat. So which means they are mainly consumed by people who are concerned by the environment, high income class. Right?
The next question is by Shubdeep Mundal. He has asked, the release of grains from the Ukraine port, how did China look at this event? Whether this has any implications for China, especially in terms of its internal politics.
Release of grains from the Ukraine, right?
Yeah, yes.
I think this is certainly a positive development, I think. But in terms of China, I think the Chinese perspective is, I would say the entire war, COVID-19, and then the China-US trade war tensions, as I mentioned earlier, has made China to rethink reliability of the current global food trading system. That's why, that's the reason why if you look at the top leader's speech, over the past 3 or 4 years, there has been numerous mention emphasis by the Chinese top leaders on the issue of food security, domestic food production. So they're shifting back a little bit back to the idea of self-sufficiency because of concerns over the external supplies. But as I mentioned during the presentation, there's no way China will become self-sufficient again. In other words, it will have to import more and more from the international market. But given the international food trading system became unreliable, unstable, I think China will want more controls, right? More so-called better alternative system. I think that's the reason why if you look at the speeches by the policy documents, they want to be a stronger relationship with some of the major trading partners, especially let's say Southeast Asian countries, Central Asian countries. That's why food security has been mentioned between China during the meetings between Chinese leaders and then the Central Asian countries and the SCO, and also the Southeast Asian countries, and then African countries as well. So they will opt for, I guess, more and more towards bilateralism or regionalism to safeguard its food security or overseas food supply.
The next question is from Sapna. She has asked, could you explain the role of saltwater rice as one of the steps taken to ensure food security by China?
Yeah, this is one of the few so-called products technological endeavors by the Chinese scientists towards addressing food security or food shortage in China. That has been developing all sorts of new variety of grain seeds so that it can grow in different terrains, different areas. There has been a lot of internal discussions or even external attentions on this so-called saltwater rice because there has been at least Chinese state media suggesting that it has been developing quite fast and major milestones were achieved. I guess especially in terms of the quantity or output. But what I know or what I have read so far is the test of this drug. It doesn't really test good, so the demand is very. I mean, the potential marketability or whether the consumer will buy it is another issue.
The next question is from Shweta. She has asked, the food preference of the Chinese have changed over the years, resulting in industrialization of pig production. But the need for pig feed to feed the hog remains a growing challenge for China. Because since the feed requires soybeans and the government focusing on staple grains,
Yes.
it offers a contradiction whereby it indirectly affects the food preference of majority of the population. How do you see this dynamics?
I think this is a very right, it's correct statement, and also the predicament faced by the Chinese government in terms of food security. Right? it has basically more or less maintained stable supply of staples, but the problem is that with diet shift, more demand for animal products, right? They're demanding more feed grains, rice, no, soybeans, corn in particular. Last year, China imported about 23 million tons of corn. That's a massive amount. And then in years to come, this kind of demand will be even higher. It's not just corn, soybean and corn, other feedstocks as well. It's very difficult for China to address this. I guess that's why we, at least I believe, because of this demand or gaps in feed supplies, China will have to import more and more from the international market. There's no turning back in terms of self-sufficiency. But there's no way China can be self-sufficient in soybean. Because that's for one. The other is, I think they're aware of this. That's the reason why they're paying more and more attention to the idea of cultivating meat. That is for one. The other is about investment in technologies, right? I think it's about better breeding technologies, better variety of pigs, which can rely less feed, or we can at least improve, increase, or has to achieve better conversion ratios, right? So the traditional varieties, the conversion ratio is very high, but with better investment and better, even in terms of genetically modified pigs, right? They may be consuming less feed but producing more meat. So this is some area they're looking into. The other one is about also diversification of agriculture import. So in the past, it's about importing more and more rice, soybeans, more and more soybeans, corns, and other feed grains, so that China can produce more pigs domestically. But now, if you look at it, China is also directly importing more and more pig, right? Rather than importing 5 million tons of soybeans or 5 million tons of corn for pig production, they can just import 1 million tons of pig or 1 million tons of beef and other meat products.
In the best interest of time, I'm taking last two questions. One is from Mr. Subramaniam Sridharan. He has asked, in view of the non-availability of usable water in the north, where more of agriculture seems to be moving these days, do you think that the diversion of water from Brahmaputra River is still on the table?
I would say this is some of the argument made by this advocates of this Brahmaputra water diversion plans, right? Because I remember when the first time when the idea of diverting waters from Tibet, including Brahmaputra, was proposed, one of the key reasons they put forward is that diverting waters from Brahmaputra and then other Tibetan rivers, would solve China's food problem once for all. So they can turn the so-called dry and then barren northern, even desert, right? Desert in Xinjiang, desert in Qinghai, to become a new agricultural food production center. And that will solve so many Chinese so-called problems faced by China, including food. So it's still attractive options. I remember even during the 1990s, when even some of the very prominent Chinese agriculture policymakers, including the one I think the father of agriculture reform, I can't remember his name. He also supported this idea. So it's suffice to say there has been is a quite attractive idea among some segments of the Chinese society, including perhaps officials, experts. But I've said overall, is quite unlikely. Is quite unlikely as of now. Think about this one, because right now, not just to mention the diverting water from Brahmaputra, for decades, the western routes of China's south-north water diversion practice, it's still been, it has been announced in 2002, right? China will divert water from upper stream of Yangtze to Yellow River. But after 20 plus years, no major action has been taken. Despite the fact that you have some of the northern and western provinces have been heavily lobbying the central government to restart the western route of south-north water diversion projects. It's not about diverting water from Putra to China's north. It's about diverting water from upstream of Yangtze to Yellow River. And one of the key oppositions or reasons for this inactions for delay is because for one is the environmental impacts. There has been very much serious concerns from Chinese environmentalists and Chinese government officials, potential environmental consequences of diverting water from Yangtze to Yellow River. The other is local oppositions. I think some of the provinces like Sichuan and Chongqing, right, those upstream Yangtze province, they are not happy with this entire project, so they oppose it because they have so much dams in their own jurisdictions. Diverting water from Yangtze will affect their dam hydropower projects. And then the other is the cost. Its estimated cost is massive. And then, but on the other hand, the economic returns is uncertain. I think that's why even after 20 plus years, the western route, or the so-called official south-north water diversion project, is still not yet being seriously discussed. Not to mention diverting waters from Putra to China's dry north. I think there's a lot of discussion about so far, but I don't think it will happen anytime soon or any very serious discussion by the Chinese leadership.
The last question is from Admiral Muralidharan, sir. The question is China making any deal with Russia for water, as Russia has no shortage of fresh water?
I don't think so. I don't think there's major deals in terms of water, because China is at the upstream of Amur River, and also at upstream of Itish River. For many years, there has been conflicts between China and Russia over the Amur River, and also between China, Russia, and Kazakhstan over the China's water diversion projects along the Itish River. So I think at least along the Itish River basin, China has been diverting much waters from that basin already. Is one of the major sources of conflicts between China and Kazakhstan. Russia is part of it. China so far has not actually taken a multilateral approach to discuss with Kazakhstan and Russia together. And therefore, and then there has been some rumors or at least news suggesting China is buying huge amount of water from, I think there's a very famous lake in Russia. There's been some Chinese company want to do that. I think this is for commercial purposes, right? For drinking water rather than agriculture or massive industrial usage. I think rather than so-called buying or purchasing waters, I think more cooperation happens in terms of water, right? A lot of agricultural cooperation deal has been signed between China and Russia in Russia's Far East, and also two countries have set up joint agriculture investment fund, and also you have tens of thousands of Chinese farmers cross the border from Heilongjiang and now farming regularly in Russia's Far East, and also some of the Chinese companies as well.
Thank you, sir. Before we move to the vote of thanks, we gratefully acknowledge the presence of Shri J.K. Verma, sir, here. Sir, would you like to add on any points to what has been discussed here quickly in 2 minutes, sir? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think I have not heard it full, so I will not be the right person to do it. But I can say whatever I heard, it was very informative, and I regret that I could not attend it since beginning. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abaji, for joining, and we always look forward to your ratings.
Oh, thank you very much. I will do it.
Thank you, sir. I now request Mr. Shubdeep Mondal to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. I hope I am audible. So it was a pleasure to witness the great minds speak. But as the proverb goes, all good things must come to an end. So without doing further ado, on behalf of the entire team of Chennai Center for China Studies, take this opportunity to extend the vote of thanks. At the outset, I thank our guest and resource person, Dr. Zhang Hongzhou, for taking out time from his busy schedule to enlighten the audience with his knowledge of China and the global food securities. Thank you very much, sir. We look forward to engage with you in future for much such informative session. I
Thank
extend
you very much. Sorry.
Okay. I extend gratitude to our distinguished members for their support and guidance. I share our heartfelt acknowledgement with our audience, which also includes the interns. We hope this session provide to be a resourceful one. Now I express my sincere thanks to Director General of C3S, Commodore R.S. Watson, for his support and guidance, which enable us to excel at our work. Last but not the least, I extend the sincere gratitude to my colleague, Mr. Bala Subramaniam C, Ms. Sapna, and Ms. Sweta for their support and coordination. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sandeep. I just wanted to say that, Dr. John, of course, had a personal health issue, which is why we had to postpone it. So I'm very happy that he's recovered and he's back here in full strength after telling to his family. So I'm grateful for your presence. Also, a big thank you to Bala also, because he's the one who was doing all the initial coordination to identify the speaker from NUS, which I visited 3 years ago before the COVID. But after that, I've not been there. So I'm sure things are as good as they were in NUS earlier. Thank you for being here today, Dr. John. Have a wonderful weekend. God bless.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.